I discovered something underneath my skin, and part of me wishes I could just forget about what I found. Written by u/unalloyed St. Trina, link in the description. It all started with a shaving cut, as the razor slid under my chin, gently removing a layer of shaving cream. My hand spasmed. I felt a tearing pain and watched in the mirror as a droplet of blood trickled down my neck, staining my shirt's white collar, before I could find something nearby to dab it away. Perfect. Just fucking perfect. Grumbled, stomping out of the bathroom while unbuttoning the shirt I had on. The closet door wearily creaked open as I rammed my shoulder into it. My goddamned muscles are out to get me, I thought to myself, fuming like a smokestack as I rifled through my clothes, searching for a fresh button-down. Seemingly, my muscle spasms would wait for me to be doing something dangerous before they decided to rear their ugly head. They never appeared when I was just lazing on the couch or anything. Instead, shaving, cooking, and splitting lumber in the backyard were the common activities they liked to disrupt, ordered from least to most harm I could inflict upon myself if I made a mistake. There had been a lot of near misses in the past. A knife slice almost carving up my forearm, an axe swing just about flaying the right side of my calf. All on account of these random spasms, my spiteful tics, always out to get me. Fortunately, before I could be too late for work, I found a relatively stainless black polo at the bottom of a pile of shirts. My frustration waned and I could think clearly again. I recognized that it was a childish belief. My muscles didn't have it out for me. No more than bumper-to-bumper traffic or a rainstorm on my birthday did, at least. That was the first time a spasm actually did get me, though. I chuckled softly, imagining myself bowing respectfully to a giant hand muscle, conceding to their hard-fought triumph. Returning to the bathroom, I placed a band-aid over the small cut on the edge of my jaw and threw on the cleanish polo, causing the last of my frustration to slip away. As I walked out the front door of my apartment, though, I started to feel a little uneasy about the injury. The cut didn't hurt. It didn't itch or bleed any more than it already had. I experienced something else with its creation, though. An impulse. Something floating through my mind that I had to suppress and contain. Unexplainable and deeply distressing in equal measure. From the moment that razor unzipped flesh, I felt the urge to pull on the edges of the wound until it expanded across my jawline, bloody fingers ripping it wide open like a Ziploc bag. When I arrived at the chapel in my beat-up sedan, my unease had only worsened. I felt like hell. My attempts to hide it were no use too. Vicar Amelie could tell I was struggling the second I dragged myself through the chapel doors. "Are you feeling under the weather, Matteo?" he shouted from the other side of the room. A lie started bubbling up my throat, lingering briefly on my lips, but I pushed it back down into my chest like a bout of acid reflux. I simply couldn't, in good conscience, try to deceive the vicar. For a lot of reasons. First and foremost, he's a man of God, as well as my boss. Lying to Emilio jeopardized both my sanctity and my financial livelihood in one fell swoop. Not only that, but the man was just physically intimidating. Stood over 7 feet tall, with an exceptionally bulky physique for his advanced age and dark brown eyes like a timber wolf. Outright deception didn't seem advisable, but I could justify a lie of omission. I wasn't about to tell the vicar about my insane urge. Yes sir, I'm feeling quite unwell. Nicked myself shaving this morning. Maybe it's become infected. I haven't been right since. A look of serious concern swept across his face. Before I knew it, the vicar had descended on me. His approach felt nearly instantaneous. I blinked, and in that time, the man had moved 20 feet forward, his massive hand encircling the back of my neck, pulling my head to the side so that the injury was directly under one of the chapel's ceiling lights. Emilio tore the band-aid off and inspected the cut. Yes. Well, a regular band-aid won't do, Matteo. Let me give you something special. Special like what, sir? I asked, truly perplexed by his alarm over what ultimately amounted to a glorified paper cut. "I'll show you. I have a box of it in my office, a holdover from my days in the Peace Corps. Stay here, sit down on a pew, and rest." As he paced away, I followed his instructions and sat down. All the while, the strange urge screamed in my head, begging for me to rip and tear at the cut until I had skinned my head like an apple. I shut my eyes, clasped my hands tight while setting them against my forehead, and I prayed for relief, which would not come. The vicar returned from his office with a square-inch piece of thick medical dressing. There was no brand name on the bandage, nor were there any adhesive strips to peel off. It was unlike anything Lyd ever seen, truth be told. Emilio held it over the cut, making sure it covered the injury's contours completely. Then, he put the bandage up to his mouth and licked one side of it, firmly dragging his blue-purple tongue from top to bottom. Before I could protest, the vicar slapped the material over the wound. Then, he pushed down hard, and I mean hard. It felt more like the man was punching my neck in extreme slow motion rather than applying careful pressure to an injury. To my surprise, whatever special bandage Emilio used seemed to work wonders. For the cut itself, sure, but also for unexplainable impulse. Right before the bizarre dressing made contact, though, the urge became exponentially louder, almost uncontrollable. Once the spongy material was secured over the laceration, however, I felt the terrible impulse wither. It wasn't gone completely, but it was certainly better. The material seemed to cover the wound as well as cauterize my mind. After about 30 seconds, the vicar moved his hand away. I massaged the muscles of my neck, which were a little sore from the forceful application, and noticed something peculiar. Somehow, the bandage had already fused with the nearby skin. That night, lying in bed, I found myself running my fingertips over where the cut had been, trying to determine what exactly the material was. Eventually, I drifted off to the sleep, still tracing the perimeter of where the vicar had installed special dressing. Even though I couldn't feel the edges of it anymore, it was like Emilio had grafted the bandage over my cut. At the time, that didn't make any sense, but before the sun rose the following morning, I would understand completely, for better or for worse. A jolt of intense pain caused my eyes to burst open. Initially, I thought I was still dreaming, but as waves of pain crashed down my neck like a rising tide slamming against the hull of a ship, I became very much aware that I was no longer asleep. I came to standing up, like I had been sleepwalking. I was in my kitchen, and the taste of copper lurched over the tip of my tongue as I oriented to my surroundings. In one hand, I held a meat cleaver stained with gore. The other held a patch of newly excised skin with frayed and ragged edges, draping lazily over my knuckles like a tan handkerchief. Apparently, I had given in to the urge in my sleep when my defenses were at their lowest. With panic surging through my body, I sprinted towards my bedroom, my socks slick with warm blood, squeaking over the wooden floor as I moved. When I approached the nightstand, I reached my right hand out to pull my phone from the wall charger. But I was still holding the cleaver, and no matter how much I willed it, my hand wouldn't release the blade. Instead, the muscles contracted with a ferocity I had never experienced before. In the past, they had just been isolated spasms. Now, the alien movements felt decidedly purposeful. My hand thrashed like a caged animal, swinging the cleaver closer and closer to my body in small but powerful arcs. Thankfully, I successfully retrieved my phone with my left hand, the hand which had discarded the patch of neck skin at some point earlier in the commotion. Another jolt of searing agony exploded through my body, this time originating from my right thigh. Despite my efforts to dodge the swipes of my spasming hand, the cleaver had connected with the flesh below my groin and was scraping downwards, slowly peeling away a second chunk of skin, this time off my leg. I howled from the pain, and the sound reverberated off the walls of my tiny apartment, right back into my ears, causing my head to throb. My blood-stained hand dialed 911 as the cleaver kept digging through the meat of my upper leg. As the line rang, I was finally able to win some control back of my right hand. pulling the blade out from my skin and slightly away from my body. The malevolent spasms calmed, and I released my grip on the handle, causing the cleaver to fall to the floor. Still waiting for someone on the other end of the call to pick up, I examined my injuries. There was a diamond-shaped wedge of detached skin hanging by a thin thread off of my leg, revealing something underneath. In that moment, time seemed to slow to a crawl. I expected to see gallons of blood spurting from the damaged tissue, but there was barely any blood at all, nor was there any muscle or bone. Instead, there was another layer of intact skin. Midway down my thigh, I saw a black and white tattoo of a paper lantern, newly visible only after the cleaver had dug through a considerable amount of flesh. Confusion pulsed through my skull like a second heartbeat. I had never been tattooed before. "Hello, Matteo?" The call had finally picked up, but somehow I hadn't reached a 911 operator. Vicar Emilio was on the other line. "Emilio, need you to call a..." My hand shot to the floor with the speed and precision of a hawk, grasping the cleaver's sticky handle tightly, blade end pointing towards me. Before I knew what was happening, the extremity swung up through the air, only stopping once it had buried the cleaver into my forehead, and then it pulled down. Over the bridge of my nose, my chin, my Adam's apple, so on and so on. Split me nearly in half, but I didn't die. When I fell, not all of me fell either. It's difficult to put into words, but I'll do my best. Maybe unzipped me is a better way to put it. From the floor, my vision became nauseatingly distinct. One eye could see into the bedroom, and the other could see down the hallway, but the images didn't mesh with each other. They weren't cohesive. Where one started, the other abruptly ended. An impossible 360-degree panoramic view of my apartment. Then, the eye that pointed towards the hallway saw a bloody foot come down inches away from its vantage point, followed by a second foot, 2 legs, and eventually a whole person, coated in a thick blanket of red-brown coagulation. The figure plodded down the hallway, frequently stumbling as it moved. As they were about to round the corner, there was a deafening crash from somewhere ahead of them, accompanied by the sound of splintering wood. The crimson phantom let loose a coarse and boggy scream. It spun around as fast as it could, terrified of whatever had made the noise. The figure had no hope of escape, however. They could barely coordinate their limbs enough to trudge down the hallway, let alone outrun what was rapidly approaching behind them. Vicar Emilio, but in a different, more predatory form. His arms and legs were the same length, and both were easily 3 feet long. His head was elongated as well, about half the length of his extremities. The back of Emilio's neck and skull rested against the ceiling because my apartment couldn't accommodate his unnatural proportions if he fully stood up. He grasped the blood-caked figure's head with one hand and held them in place. Then, his other hand stretched down the hallway, slithering like a viper, until it grabbed onto me. My husk slid against the floor as the vicar dragged me towards the person who had been trapped inside the confines of my body only a few minutes prior. The nameless man with the lantern tattoo. In a few quick movements, Emilio sheathed me over the figure like plastic wrap over a gingerbread man. When he needed more skin to patch up or seal a particular area, extra skin grew from the center of his chest in the shape of a scare, at which point he would tear a piece off and apply it where he needed to. The figure's gurgled screams died down as he became progressively more entombed inside me, eventually going silent completely once I had been fully reformed. You might be asking yourself why I'm posting this, and the answer is actually pretty simple. He asked me to. As it turns out, nearly everyone in a 10-mile radius is just like me. A fleshy extension of the vicar with someone else trapped inside. Emilio himself cannot reproduce. This is his alternative. Some of us know what we are, some of us don't. So, here's what the vicar has instructed me to pass along. He's been here for a few months, and already there's thousands of us. It's only a matter of time. Please don't resist like the man with the lantern tattoo when your time comes. Accept your sleep-like erasure with dignity. We can all be the vicar's children. In fact, you may already be one. You just don't know it yet. Thank you for listening to the end. Don't forget to subscribe.